Thank you for taking the time to listen to this presentation on the body of work known as a refraction of truth. As we move through this presentation, I'll tell you a little bit about me, my diagnosis, and the process that I have gone through in order to create this body of work. So I'm Teresa. I'm a visual artist from Derry, Londonderry. I graduated from Ulster University with a Master's in Photography in 2022. I was diagnosed with a mental health disorder at the age of 28 and discovered photography as a coping mechanism to deal with the emotions and feelings that I was experiencing, as well as memories, and those feelings that I continue to experience to this day. So my diagnosis is dysthymia and moderate depression, which I'll go into in a little bit more detail in the coming slides. Social anxiety disorder and generalized anxiety disorder. So throughout this body of work that I have made, all these themes run throughout. So it's really important that you're aware of the diagnosis. So what is dysthymia? Dysthymia is a long-lasting form of depression. It's also called persistent depressive disorder. People with this condition may also have bouts of major depression at times, known as double depression. But what's a double depression? So, a double depression refers to the coexistence of a major depressive disorder and a persistent depressive disorder, which I'll now, going forward, refer to as an MDD or PDD. Research has shown that double depression tends to be more severe than either MDD or PDD alone, and that individuals with double depression experience relapse more often than those with either MDD or PDD alone. Many factors are thought to contribute to this depression. These include environmental, psychological, biological, and genetic factors. Chronic stress and trauma have also been linked to this condition. A diagnosis may be made after a careful medical and history examination of the patient by a mental health professional and psychiatric team. Because this condition usually lasts for longer than 5 years, long-term treatment may be needed, and this is true in my case. I am on antidepressants for the rest of my life due to the amounts of relapses and ongoing care that I need in order to deal with my diagnosis. To diagnose this condition, an adult must have a depressed mood for at least 2 years or 1 year in a child or teen, along with at least 2 depressive symptoms. The symptoms of this illness may look like other mental health conditions, so it's really important that you seek the proper support in order to get a proper diagnosis. Dysthymia affects women twice often as men. There is no clear cause for this type of depression. Mental health professionals do think it's a result of chemical imbalances in the brain. Often, people with dysthymia grow accustomed to the mild depressive symptoms and do not seek help. And in my case, this is very true, as I started to believe that my constant low mood that I was feeling for such a long time had become my personality, and it was just who I was. And it turned out that from the age of 14, I was actually suffering with this type of depression, and that was highlighted due to the psychiatric team's examination. And I really found it really interesting that one of the questions I was asked that really stood out during that time, because a lot of it I don't remember, was, can you tell us the last time you remember being happy? And I just couldn't remember a time where I felt a full level of happiness. I do experience joy and things like that, but it's never to the same level of somebody who's not suffering from persistent depressive disorder. So dysthymia seems to run in families, but there is ongoing research in this area. So my body of work, once we get into it, you'll see is quite abstract in style. So I just wanted to talk about why I use abstract art. So psychologists utilized abstract images, asking patients to project themselves or their mindsets onto pictures through the likes of the Rorschach test many years ago. This then continued into spectral cards and O cards and therapeutic tools that we use today through photography, getting people to take images and then talking through how that relates to them, and how it makes them feel and things like that. So it enabled people to develop a deeper understanding of themselves and the therapist of the patient's minds. The whole idea behind the Rorschach test was intended that an individual is shown an ambiguous, meaningless image and the viewer's mind projects meaning onto it based on what they perceived. It's thought that the test encouraged self-reflection about their internal world. So these kind of elements from the Rorschach test have been carried forward, like I say, into new therapies. It is believed that in order to consider an image an abstract portrait, it must contain two elements. It must contain the concept of a portraiture and be abstract in style. But what makes a self-portrait successful is its ability to enable the maker to delve deep within themselves. Facing our ego, we are learning about personal identity on levels we have never engaged with before. Abstract art and reductionism has this ability and has suggested that it shows us a version of ourselves and identifying there is more to us than we acknowledge. Also, studies have suggested that artists who have been diagnosed with a mental health disorder have been known to veer towards abstract art in their creations, and this was very true of Willem de Kooning's work. When he had been diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease, his work began to veer towards abstraction more and more. For me, I find this quote really nice and important, that abstraction allows man to see with his mind what he cannot physically with his eyes. And this, I think, really fits with my work because I can't physically see or understand my thoughts and feelings by just looking around me and dealing with the environments around me. However, once I have a piece of work or a picture in front of me, I began to see things with the mind, and how I perceive things begins to become a little bit more clear. So studies have suggested that abstract art has qualities that can enable us to alter our mindsets, and that's Boutoul 2020 has suggested that. This in hand helps develop a self-awareness and acceptance of the self, and that's the underlying theme that my body of work aims to do, is enable me to develop self understanding and develop self-revelations. So the body of work I made is, as said earlier, is a refraction of truth. And as I go through, I will explain how this piece of work was made. But what I'm going to do first is I'm going to read you a little bit of the artist's statement, and then we'll break it down as we go along. So, inspired by automatism, automatism is a creative technique for producing artworks without thought, will, or intervention from the conscious mind. The mind is freed from the conscious making of the image. Suffering from dysthymia, persistent depressive disorder, the work enables the artist to depict a world they have experienced when their control and reality in life become lost. In life, our perception of reality is skewed, and even more so in heightened periods of depression and anxiety. Using photography and new technologies, the work depicts the struggles experienced, as well as developing self-revelations through symbolic interpretations. The final portrait surprised the viewer through dreamlike imagery, the challenges, our expectations and tropes. The work focuses on mental illness, exploring the themes of recovery and relapse. So during heightened periods of depressive states, and also during therapy, we talk about cognitive distortions that we experience. And a cognitive distortion is things that distort the language in your brain, your thoughts and your cognitions and the way things are processed. When we are in a heightened depressive episode, this is when the distortions are at their worst. Our perception of the self is altered, how we view ourselves. It's believed that if all you see is negatives, that's a major sign that depression is distorting your views. This body of work recognizes these distortions, questions our reality, just like these images that are questionable of what is real and what is not. And by that I mean made by the artist or what is created by machine. The images are not as they begin, and so this plays with our perception of real and reality. So on the left here is a self-portrait, just taken in my studio, and then it has been manipulated using AI software, in this case an app on my phone. And just in case anybody's unaware, AI basically stands for artificial intelligence software. So what I did was I used keywords and I combined a portrait with text, and the program creates an image free from my control. That's the automatism that I spoke about earlier. You can still in some way evidence that there is an original portrait there, but the final picture takes on a new appearance and therefore a new meaning. Using self-portraits and altering their state and removing the image from its original context that is a trait of abstract art, again, is another way of altering the meaning that was firstly intended for the images. Even though some images do not look like a recognizable self-portrait, throughout this body of work, I consider them all to be a version of a self-portrait, and this is because it is believed that capturing the essence of the photographer is an algorithm that can suggest that abstract art, in this case within photography, can be viewed as a self-portrait. So to me, all these images are self-portraits. Lowenthal 2013 supports this by suggesting when making self-portraits, it is believed that we take photographs that are important in our lives, more so at an unconscious level, suggesting that all images we take are self-portraits. So this sequence of images are put through the AI software, starting with a portrait, combined with the keywords, and this is the 3 images that happened to come out. And when I put them together, it started to take on a real religious connotations, and from there I titled this Unknown Crucifixion Sacrifice. So when I was looking at the symbolism behind the crucifixion and sacrifice, I found a really interesting quote that so many gaze at the cross and yet hold on to hurt, pain and problems. They don't belong in your back any longer. Jesus has taken them on his. And I believe that I had taken on everybody else's happiness to make sure they were happy, and pushed away my own kind of troubles at the time that I then led to a major breakdown. So I kind of started to feel that the meanings of these images was that I was carrying a heavy burden, such as a cross here. For me, this sequence depicts my own crucifixion. I always put myself last, putting everyone and everything else ahead of me. The cross became my burden. When I found myself bound to the cross, I faced those sacrifices I had made. In order to help myself get well, I had to metaphorically sacrifice myself. Through this realization, I began my journey through metaphorical death and rebirth. My journey to recovery could begin. I endured the pain, but still forgive those who played their part in my metaphorical death. So for me, the crucifixion of our Lord is really, really powerful. And it looks at then the strength of rebirth, and that idea of rising again through strength and courage of my own, to then follow a journey of recovery. As you can see, the work is black and white in a style, and the reason for this is because black and white images are pictorial rendition of both hope and despair to which mankind is prone to experience. Freeman 2017. According to Cartier-Bresson, black and white images abstract things. It places imagery in a tonal separate space of which the frontiers of perception are within the viewer's imagination. The freed up imaginative process while looking at black and white images creates room for new explorations and meaning to each different viewer. So I mentioned in my artist statement that I read to you earlier that symbolic interpretation is a way in which I develop understanding of myself through the work. So basically, the image I see, I project a meaning or a memory onto the work, and then I work through what the actual symbolism of that creature or figure or whatever it may be actually represents. So for me, I found a lot of imagery that seemed to take the shape of moth-like creatures within the body of work. And I found this really interesting because I cast a memory onto the work first, which is normally negative in terms of what I'm processing. And then I journey through that memory and look at, how I've managed to get to where I am now, and break it down and develop an understanding of it for me to be able to then let it go and move on from it. So basically, what I found really interesting about these moths or moth-like imagery that was appearing was they started to create a cycle or sequence of a life cycle of a moth. So for me, like I say, I cast it on the negative memory first. And when I first seen these images of moths, I projected a negative feeling towards the actual images as well, just because I was like, oh, I don't like moths. They kind of freak me out. But then when I delved deep within to understand what the moth actually symbolized, it put a real positive spin on the actual meaning of this image, and then how that resonated with my journey to recovery. So for these 3 images, I thought depicted a sequence or the life cycle of a moth. A moth symbolizes transformation, hidden knowledge, inner wisdom, psychic abilities, and shadow work. They show up to help you discover your hidden desires, awaken to your true self, which resonates with the same traits of abstract art. They are beautifully symbolic of our spiritual journey, transformation, and regeneration. They resonate with death, which resonates with change and the ending of something, so something new can begin. And so what I really liked about this sequence of images when I put them together was it literally depicted that journey that I'm going through. So in the first image, it looks like the moth within its cocoon, and that idea of me going deep within inside myself to draw out these memories, to work through them. And then as I began to work through them, I began to be reborn, I guess, or in the second image, freed from the cocoon. I began to grow. And then in the third image, I was completely freed from the cocoon, and I was out in the real world and able to move on. So the message from a moth is this: if you're searching for a deeper meaning to your life, the light you're looking for is inside of you, not outside of you. Your own inner truth, your light, your intuition, and higher self guide you to your highest path and truest nature. What I find really interesting about a moth is that, like butterflies, they have beautiful markings as well. and they're unable to see their natural beauty, which I think is so representative of me, as I lack a lot of self-confidence and self-esteem, and look quite negatively at myself, that I fail to see what beauty I do have there. So I think that's a really powerful message that I can take from those connotations. Other imagery that appeared within the work was the raven. And again, it has that negative connotation around the raven. But again, when you look deeper into the meaning of it, it developed a more positive outlook as well. So for me, the raven depicts the full journey of recovery and relapse. In many Celtic traditions, the raven symbolises chaos, which is the depressive state that I experience when things seem to be really out of control for me. They're associated with death, my breakdown, as well as symbolising the strength of a warrior and that ability to recover and rebuild myself. The raven has also been associated with feelings of fear and anxiety, but when the bird or yourself confronts the unknown head on, we find that things that seemed obscured or frightening are not as so tricky as they first appeared. For me, this plays with how we first perceive things and how we catastrophize things in a deep state of anxiety. So these three self-portraits, again, I think really depicts my illness completely. So in the first image, I see my 14-year-old self, where I was functioning. You can see there's cracks on the head, and it's fragmented a wee bit. So yeah, I see my 14-year-old self that didn't really know I was sick, but I knew a wee bit that I wasn't right. However, I learned to just live with it and accept that it was just part of me. Then I have my 28-year-old self in the middle, and at this point I've completely broken. I've metaphorically died, and I'm just a shell of myself. And then, even though it looks a little Silence of the Lambs, the third portrait is myself now, and that idea that I am in a journey of recovery, and there's moth-like imagery within this again. These manipulations have covered the eyes and mouth in this instance, and for me, taking the connotations of the moth and the eyes, I feel that during my recovery, if I can look deep within myself, I can develop ways in order to change myself, to deal with the illness, and how I speak as well. If I can speak about myself in a more positive way, or about things in a more positive language, I guess, then I can maybe change the simpler things that hold me back. So Zaki 2013 explains photography is a need to discover things, to search for what is hidden and waiting to be discovered, and eventually then revealed in the form of a photograph. And I think this sequence depicts that. Photographs are able to draw out memories or emotional responses to its viewers and enables the interpretation of the photo to be developed. And I think throughout this body of work, that's exactly what's been happening. So this is just another sequence of images. These can be either standalone or in a set of 3. To me, I prefer the third one as a standalone image. But photography can be philosophically allied with art because it manipulates versions of reality in order to reveal truths. Flowers wilt and die. Flowers represent fragility and the swift passage from life into death, which again shows the journey of letting go for new growth and new lived experiences. Some flowers are seen as symbols of friendship and purity, while others are tied to forgiveness and death. And I think through the other pieces that I have spoken about, all these themes run throughout the visuals, and they really start to create a meaningful message for me anyway. So my work can be described as therapeutic photography, opposed to phototherapy. And the difference I just want to point out is that therapeutic photography can be done with just yourself and projecting your meanings onto it, whereas phototherapy, which is like the OKRs that I mentioned at the very, very beginning, is done with a trained professional or therapist. So therapeutic photography allows photographers to make work enabling them to develop self-awareness and self-inquiry. Therapeutic photography involves photographic practices creating images by the person themselves. The imagination gives a future to the past, and Berger 1995 suggests that when a photograph is found as meaningful, we lend it a past and a future. And that's exactly what I feel I do with my work. I lend it my past and then it lends me my future, you know, when I draw from it those positive connotations. So photography, whether the images are pictorial or abstract, have become more about finding inner calm, peace and tranquility, opposed to creating photographs, and that's Kim 2022 suggests that. Photography can also be used as a tool to storytell. And again, I think that's very, very true of my work. I tell a story of my life through these images, and that's been the same through any kind of body of work that I have created around these themes. So not all the images I decided needed manipulated. I thought that just taking them out of their original context and abstracting them was enough. And in particular, I found that the shots with trees or twigs were quite important to be included in this body of work, just as a non-manipulated abstract style. And the reason for this is because trees can represent recovery from illness. Twigs symbolize sorrow of separation, which resonates with the trauma I've endured as a child. However, branches are said to resonate with overcoming obstacles and finding a way through as they grow around things and obstacles, finding an alternative way. And what I really find interesting too about trees and branches and all those kind of bushes and things is that nature always takes back what it owns, you know. It's never stopped in order to get to where it's wanting to go. It'll go around things, and I think that's really important in my journey of recovery, that if there's an obstacle in the way, it's always really important to keep in mind that there is a way around that. So the tree is quite strong in this representation. In the theme of recovery, I've had to find alternative ways to deal with the world surrounding me, and develop a new way of looking at my lived experiences and understanding that there is always going to be a way through it all. Photography allows me to capture that bit of light during the darkest hours through these images that it enables me to create. So just to conclude, what is of great importance, the power within the arts, is its ability to tell us something about people and their social worlds. Chatterjee, 2014. This is said to be true of the creator and the viewer, which upholds the notion that art in all its forms, but in this case photography, may help us develop a deeper understanding of ourselves through emotions, characteristics and memories that we recall when encountering images. According to Hare 2018, images that are usually unusual and unknown attract the most attention. This could be why abstract art is successful at drawing us in and forcing us to delve deep within to develop a deeper understanding of oneself, and why I find photography a powerful tool in understanding of myself and enables me to work towards recovery. Where language fails us, photography and art offers us a voice. Thank you.